I'm standing on the Mount of Olives on what looks like a very hazy day, but actually it's a dust storm. And one of the things I love about being here is that Jesus may not have seen some of these modern buildings and these cars and trucks that are going by, but you know he was familiar with the dust storm and the heat and some of the views of the slope of the mountain. We're overlooking the old city of Jerusalem, and the most predominant landmark is that of the Dome of the Rock that sits on the very place where Abraham sacrificed Isaac, Mount Moriah. And then later it was the threshing floor where David bought in order to build the temple. And of course he couldn't build the temple, but his son Solomon built the first temple that was glorious. The Babylonians destroyed it, took the children of Israel off into captivity, but then 70 years later they came back and they rebuilt the temple. King Herod refurbished the temple, and so that in Jesus' day, he would have walked and talked in Herod's temple that sat on that very same site. And the week before the crucifixion, Jesus went to the Temple Mount, and every day he taught. And after he would teach, he would come down across the Brook Kidron, or across the Brook Kidron, cross the Kidron Valley. He would go up the Mount of Olives, and he would cross over into Bethany, where he would spend the night. On one particular day, he had finished teaching on the Mount, and he crossed the little valley. He came up the Mount of Olives, but instead of going straight to Bethany, he sat down and he taught his disciples. And what he taught them was very interesting, because several days earlier, he had told the Pharisees and the Sadducees that they didn't know what time it was. They didn't know what time they were living in human history. And he said, you can discern the weather by looking at the sky, but you can't discern the signs of the times. And what time it was in their lives, it was time for the Messiah, the one that they had looked for, longed for. They knew the Old Testament scriptures. They should have recognized him. But he had come into his own, and his own received him not. They didn't know what time it was. So they missed something critically important because they didn't know the signs of the times. And so several days later, Jesus is sitting on the Mount of Olives, and his disciples say, Jesus, teach us how to tell time. Tell us how we can know what time it is that we're living in human history. Specifically, they wanted to know what would be the sign of the end of the age, how they would know if they were living in the last generation. And so Jesus, sitting on the Mount of Olives, overlooking the beautiful city of Jerusalem that he loved, taught his disciples, and you and me through his disciples, how to tell time. And he gave them signs that I've divided into 5 categories: into spiritual signs, national signs, environmental signs, personal signs, and then global signs. And I'm going to give you these categories and give you the signs in those categories so that you yourself can learn how to tell time.